Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around for the Q&A of Dreambreaker, a pickleball story. My name is Dominique O'Neill. I'm a programmer at SF DocFest, and it is my pleasure to introduce today director Ashley Underwood and writer-producer Craig Coyne. Thank you so much for joining us and being here. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks
Thanks
for
for
having
having us.
This is such a juicy film. I would have
me.
followed pickleball closer if I would have known. So let me ask you how you all got the idea for this film.
Yeah, I'll start with that. I was doing development on a pickleball project. I had raised some money to do something in the pickleball space. But I met Craig when he was writing a Vanity Fair piece on pickleball. I think it was really one of the first pieces that ever came out. It's been almost 3 years ago now. And he had just done this incredible amount of research and knew everyone in the space and was very, very generous with his knowledge and introductions to, all the sort of key players and movers and shakers in the pickleball world. But he did tell me, he just had this amazing insight and he was like, this is the story to be told in this space. And I'll let him elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, as Ashley said, I had really gone deep on pickleball, probably embarrassingly so, but I just really wanted to understand it. I want to understand it, understand what this burgeoning phenomenon at that point, before it even really transcended in a way that it has since then, because it was confusing to me. Like, why is this sport purportedly the fastest growing sport in America, and still at that time really underground, and most importantly, why is it doing things that really defy most cultural trends of the era? Meaning, specifically, why is this game with a silly name transcending class, for instance, in a way that very few things in our country are? And so I really, yeah, just went on a mission to understand the sport, and who's in it and who's pioneering it, and its different facets. And in doing so, I met Ashley, as she said, as I was writing an article for Vanity Fair. And it was, I suppose, a rather, serendipitous meeting, and that she had this, this development money, and I had got to know the space pretty well, and I said to her, like, totally unsolicited advice, but for what it's worth, I think the most interesting thing that's happening right now is something that happens only every few generations, if we're being honest, which is, before our very eyes right now, we're seeing the birth of a professional sport, and that's pretty cool. And when that happens, there are a real cast of characters that come out, both on the player front, people who are working, full-time jobs, and kind of weekend warriors who are, who are grinding it out on the tour for, at that point, no money, to big money guys, who might be coming in as investors or entrepreneurs and trying to wrap their arms around, the swelling movement, and commodify the sport in a way.
Yeah. Can you talk about the access you had to both the MLP and the PPA? And did that come from your previous rating, or how did you build those relationships?
Those were
Yeah,
really Craig. Those were really Craig's
Yeah.
connections. I mean, those were really his. But yeah, our access changed at various points in the film.
Mhm.
So we would have good access and then not so good. But I'll let Craig talk about the league owners that he
yeah.
knew.
I mean, it's funny in that. So we filmed in early November 21 at the first ever Major League Pickleball event, which was outside Austin in Dripping Springs, Texas. It was awesome. It was really cool. Again, it was the first that league founder I had gotten to know in the course of writing the Vanity Fair piece. Um, and when we showed up, the piece had actually just been published, coincidentally, like a couple weeks before. And when we showed up there, there were people in the pickleball space who weren't mentioned in the article by name, who were thanking me. Not that I was doing it altruistically in the slightest, but thanking me for writing about them, and they felt like validating them and seeing them, because they, it was kind of this like mocked, ridiculed, kind of derided sport at the time. And so fortunately we got in early. As the film chronicles, there's rival leagues and league founders, um, but mirroring the growth of the sport that we chronicle in the film and the influx of capital and celebrity. We went from being really welcomed with beyond open arms, and people really appreciated us being there, to once for instance
Everyone wanting to be a filmmaker, everybody wanting to
yeah, just
have a
like everyone.
reality show. Yeah.
Yeah, just like every it became a very celeb du jour thing to do, to buy a pickleball team. It became a you know a very like LA thing or doc thing to suddenly try to chronicle this phenomenon. And so thankfully we were the first in, and I think the first out. But there was this influx also of folks with camera crews, and we actually, while we had amazing access to players and the leagues and to really pivotal moments in these leagues, which there's a scene in there where we were very fortunate to get a camera in during a really seminal, and very sensitive moment in time in the greater story itself. But we also got temporarily kicked out of Major League Pickleball after having filmed there a number of times, because LeBron James's production company kicked us out to make
That to me,
Gosh.
like when LeBron came into the sport and bought a team, and he has like a holding company, it's like he has, there are other people. It's like a whole entity. And but that really sort of energized and validated the sport in a way that, we had been trying to do as filmmakers. But that just was its pivotal moment in this shift, and sort of everybody got really excited. I would say the egos swelled a little bit. That it just changed everything. And the LeBron thing, I mean, it was sort of humorous. I actually couldn't believe it, because we had such incredible access. And when we started filming, it was still, had this kind of folksy community feel to it, even in the pro game. And then all of a sudden, everybody came proprietary like overnight. And then agents kind of entered the scene. And then the agents suddenly wanted to become these gatekeepers. But we had these relationships, and we had been filming with people. And I know this happens in documentaries. I've read about it or heard about it, from friends and who are also filmmakers. So it's kind of interesting, and you just kind of have to pivot and go kind of where the access is. But for pickleball in particular, I just think it was, I had worked with Sacha Baron Cohen, and I had done like the Borat movie and like Who Was America, and we were able to gain access, to so many people. I mean, we had Rudy Giuliani in a hotel room, and I was just like, I've been kicked out of Major League Pickleball, like how is this even happening? And we were able to, like, there's a scene in the movie where we filmed the draft, and that was something that was the day we found out we had been kicked out. And, with Craig's access, he was friends with the league owner, who I think felt just so bad that, he had signed this exclusive contract with this other production company, and they were one of the team owners. And, we ended up finding a way around to sort of give us access. So we do have footage from that. But I also just found it amusing that the film kind of ended up getting swept up in this drama and this, exclusivity and this,
Right.
gold rush and this competition. I was like, oh gosh, like the filmmakers, we're also kind of swept up in this. Um, so, the irony of that definitely wasn't lost on us.
Yeah, those exclusivity contracts are really, I mean, those are wild. Did you know, I mean,
The
going
lead
in,
owner who kicked us out was the guy who was sort of, he was kind of, he was the one himself who was so upset that somebody else had come in and signed all of his top players to exclusive contracts. And then in a very sort of like Shakespearean ironic way, he was turning around and doing the same thing to us. and had preached earlier on in the film, how somebody else's success, doesn't take away your own, or he had these very eloquent, like, inspirational messages, and then sort of didn't really seem to, that act in itself didn't really seem to fall in line with, like, the ethos or the things that he was preaching.
So wild. Did you know going into the film that like these big players are, with these contracts are determining the quality of the players' lives? Like, is that something that you wanted to highlight as part of this film going in, or is that something that just developed with the passing of time and the commodification of the sport?
The money definitely changed significantly in a way that we couldn't foresee at the outset of filming. When there was essentially a bidding war for these players. I mean, they were the tremendous beneficiaries of that competition, of course, and it was deeply personal, and kind of hilarious because the math is a bit wonky, but maybe that's just startup business. Like obviously lots of what we think of as successful startups run in the red for a long time, and so it's easy to criticize these guys and their egos and their deep pockets and everything, and I'm not saying anyone has acted perfectly by any means, but it's also pretty incredible to see. We film with one of our characters, Tyson McGuffin, great character. Really enjoyed getting to know him personally. We filmed with him in November 2021. The guy's got 4 kids. He's working like a madman between coaching camps and clinics and doing all these things, trying to support his family in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And it's a real slog. And a calendar year later, the guy's making hundreds of thousands of dollars and maybe now more from pro pickleball. It's pretty wild. And that all, I think, I mean, I knew that one of the characters who emerged on the scene while we were filming, I did know that was going to happen. I did not know the ramifications, and even here, just like financially and economically, and what it meant for these people and their livelihoods. It's been in like a really incredible and at times inspiring and heartening and at times comical thing to witness. People's lives transformed for better and for worse.
I think to me, the funny thing that Craig is talking about too is, like, you have people that are like these weekend warriors, like they've got a 9-to-5 job. Like Ben John's the #1 player in the world. He was a student at the University of Maryland. He's kind of walking around a college campus. Nobody really knows who he is. And then he goes to play pickleball on the weekends and he's like a rock star, or Annalie Waters, who's the #1 player, the young girl that plays with her mother. Her mother was an attorney and went and active as an attorney to go and travel the world playing pickleball with her daughter. And then you meet these other people who have jobs like they're like CPAs, like a professor or a lawyer. And then it's really funny to think of somebody like your Monday through Friday or 9-to-5 is like, just so you have a different life on the weekend. You're on tour basically, and you get to kind of and within that community, those people are, it's its whole little universe. And some of those people, if you're a top player, you have fans, you have people who want to take selfies with you when you walk into a tournament.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real Clark Kent Superman aspect of it.
I was thinking Flash dance.
These people, and because we're at a stage in this sports maturation or evolution where it's not like you go to Wimbledon and the players enter through a tunnel. There's no interaction. I mean, everyone's parking in the same parking lot. Everyone is sort of forced to physically rub elbows and shoulders on the grounds. And it's funny. I mean, these players have fans, and they, are treated like stars, and you see how that changes some of the players. But also you have to imagine, like, Ashley said, they're students, or they're CPAs, or at least they were before the money got to the point where it did. But you know I can't imagine they get recognized often at Trader Joe's. It's kind of this like funny duality to their lives, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe they will now after this film's out there.
So we're starting to see Ryan Ferry, I think.
Well, I was really happy to see it by the end of the film that the players form this collective in order to protect themselves a little bit. Can you tell us how that's going? Do you have any insight into that?
I don't know if we have an update on that. That happened
Mm.
like, I mean, we did just finish filming like not that long ago.
Okay.
But that was something, there were kind of whispers of that. It was something that when we interviewed, that people were timid, or, like Big Brother is watching, we had like, they would whisper the word, union. And, there might be some people meeting, in the back alley, that some players who are, discussing forming a union. So it was definitely a question that we always asked, and it was something that a few people were willing to talk to us about. Um, and then I was happy to see in the end. I actually don't. I think because that's a card in the film. I think that was information that just came to us like super recently, and we were able to kind of add that in the film because it was a theme that we were kind of following, but we didn't think that it would happen within the time frame that we were filming. So we didn't even know, really whether to address it or not. So I was happy to see that those players did form some kind of collective. And I mean, there are probably lawsuits because I know their contracts maybe weren't honored. They were asked to reduce their salaries by 40%. And I think everybody, we all, everybody kind of felt like that might happen. And I think that is that I would guess that collective still exists because I'm sure that whatever's happening with those contracts, that people, they probably hired attorneys, that's probably an ongoing legal process, I would assume, and therefore would assume that that collective, would probably exist. I don't know if it exists forever. Like, I don't know if it will have a life beyond just that one contract situation, but I would hope that it would, because I think it would be great for the sport and great for all the players.
Yeah, and to Ashley's point, that is something that became very apparent throughout the interviews and throughout the processes. There's a lot of fear, and I don't want to necessarily say fear of any sort of retribution, but there's just also a lot of uncertainty. Like, there's mergers, there's that gets blown up, there's remergers, there's contracts aren't being fulfilled, and they are, and simply just the future and the viability of what we're talking about. There's not an entity in place that at least ostensibly is strictly player orientated and their welfare. And then on top of that, no one knows, like, is this the next NFL? Is this the next movie pass? Who knows? It's too early to tell. So it just feels like a tenuous ground that, and it's taking a real toll, I think, on everyone from top to bottom. The uncertainty, the whiplash of, uh, you know, who are we playing with this week? Who's our sort of governing body? Like, it's a wild, turbulent world, and it's exciting because of the promise and all these unknown variables, and the future could be so bright. But it's yeah, I mean, I think it's really taxing on these folks, and I think there's a lot of fear.
Mhm.
I think the interesting thing too about the union stuff is that, and Doug Ellen says this in the film, but he's like, to Ben Johns and Anna Lee, the top male and top female players, He's like, do they become bigger than the game itself? You know, like we'll see. And then we kind of do see that in the end when you have the war rooms and the people competing for players, because the MLP signs over 100 players and PPA gets a fraction of that, like maybe half. So, you know, most people clearly sort of voted for one entity or to stay with one entity, but the other one wins. And so you kind of, these two players do have all this, they do hold all this power. And then with the union discussions, I think, yeah, and this is like an age-old thing, I feel like that happens with like labor unions, but it's like you have these two powerful people, they have the power essentially to unionize or to stand up for the players, you know, like who aren't as high ranked. But I think everybody just kind of had this feeling like, oh, you know, they're in these power seats and they should step up for the little guy, or they should step up to, you know, what is it, rising tides lift all boats, like it should, they they were kind of looking to those two, you know, to they realized that they needed to spearhead a union effort. And I think everybody just sort of thought, well, that's probably not going to happen.
But to be fair, that's a lot of pressure and expectation to place upon us.
Totally. I'm not saying, yeah, I'm not
Right,
saying it's not. I
right,
agree. Yeah.
just to remind everyone that, you know, in the case of Ben and Anna Lee is a 16-year-old, and she's unbelievably poised and unbelievably impressive, and you know, incredible in so many ways. But you know, it's kind of, you know, I guess heavy as the head. It's a real burden that you, if you're Ben or Anna Lee, like you kind of just want to play. I think in both of their cases, they kind of just want to play pickleball. That they don't, not necessarily looking to be the face of the sport or to be larger than the sport. To Doug Ellen's point, but all eyes are on them, and that's, you know, that's kind of an interesting position for star athletes to be in. You know, some just personality wise are better suited to
Yeah.
um, you know, withstand all the other expectations and burdens and responsibilities of their stardom, and others that's just not who they are. And I'm not saying that is who or is not who Ben is. And in Annalee's case, she's so remarkable, but she's also so young. And it's, you know, it's a lot. It's a lot to have all your colleagues looking at you, expecting you to be their savior of sorts. Like I really feel for him in that respect.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though that, you know, in the birth of a sport, or some people, you know, amusingly called it a sport in its terrible twos, just to witness people being put in these situations. And what do they do? I mean, it's, you know, it's sort of voyeuristic in a way, like you're, you know, it's because we see these stories all the time and these themes and these characters and these choices, you know, they repeat themselves. I always find, you know, that's what I liked about this story from the beginning. I mean, I love pickleball, but I love that this is kind of a story about like American like ambition and the American dream. And um you know, I could watch a version of this story over and over again, you know, because I like all these facets and all these, you know, the power dynamics, and how to see how things play out.
Yeah, and I think one more theme that I think is fairly American that's also really heartening, at least I think so, is, you know, you could call America a land of second chances, and this sport, maybe not in Annalee's case because she's so young, but these people that we're following, like they, none of them other than Anna Lee maybe thought that being a professional athlete was in their future. Maybe they just didn't quite get there as tennis players, or maybe they weren't tennis players. But it's really, I don't know. It's to me like almost even aspirational to watch someone achieve something that they thought was probably out of their reach, at least at that point in life. And yeah, it's will that change in pickleball as you know, with more money coming in, and therefore like more people pivoting to pickleball younger and feeling more incentivized to try to go pro? Probably, but at least, you know, in these early days, it's really yeah, it's really cool, even kind of inspiring to see people get a, you know, kind of like one more shot at the brass ring.
Yeah, it's such a unique time for the sport. Um, just going back to because we were kind of talking about the power dynamics, and I'm really curious about the Tom Dundon reveal. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'll let Ashley talk about it, but it was it took 2 years to to get that interview, and then she like with many obstacles we faced, refused to refused to quit. So she gets all the credit there.
Yeah, we had to, Tom was just, it's funny in the movie because everyone's saying, oh, I've never met the guy, or he's like this mysterious character. Um, and, I had approached him several times, and so had Craig. And, he would always sort of, he would always say something like, oh, I really want this film to be about the players. I don't want it to be focused on myself.
He
Or he
was great. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure we point out that he was great in like giving us access to the PPA, and he was really helpful.
Yeah, he actually, we thought he wouldn't, we thought he would be the more difficult one with access. But he was very generous giving us access to everything. And I think he was just very different. Like he and Steve Kuhn just had such different personalities and such different approaches. Like Steve Kuhn was, he's such a great salesman. He's an idealist, he really just says, these wonderful, like inspirational things. And he loves the sport so much and is so passionate. And Tom was just kind of this more vanilla, like, I mean, almost like a corporate feel, like just he was going to build this just like, just put, one foot in front of the other and do it. And maybe not as sexy of a way. And he was very different from Steve. He was like, Steve has really made himself, he's the league. The league is kind of about him, he's the face of it. And which is fine, but his approach was, I want to be, like the man behind the curtain. He's like, I want you to focus on the pro players. This is about them, and I want to lift them up. So that was always, and I thought, well, true or not, it sounds like a great it's a great excuse to not give an interview. I don't want to make it about myself. But I think he did it once that that it looked like Tom or the PPA, they were kind of win this whole war room thing. I had some people, Ken Solomon from the tennis channel, he and Tom Dundon started like a pickleball channel together. And he is the one, I think, who convinced Tom, you should kind of take your bow at the end. Like you've kind of knocked your, enemy off the board. You should just, there's nothing really at stake now. You've kind of won this. So, you should sit for this interview and take a bow, if you will. And so I'm glad he agreed to it. And I was surprised when I interviewed him. He had a lot of, everything he said to me kind of made sense. And off the record, he said to me, he goes, I signed these players to these exclusive contracts because that's what advertisers and sponsors, that's the first thing they'll ask you. He's like, if you want TV time, on ESPN or one of these networks, like they're not going to want to give you those time slots or cover it at all if they can't be 100% sure that the number one player in the world is going to be playing. Like if they're at another tournament that weekend, he was just like, those are the rules. And he's like, I'm growing a league, and he had more experience. I mean, he owns the Carolina Hurricanes. He had a sports background. I don't believe Steve Kuhn had, as a former hedge fund guy, he was a Wall Street guy, and he was great at creating that hype, around a business and with getting those celebrity investors. And he made it sexy. He made it fun. He hyped it up. And Tom had this kind of, I feel like it was kind of like a more corporate kind of approach. But I thought, I was glad it gave us an interview in the end. It didn't feel complete without that.
Yeah, and one thing, I mean, such great contrasting styles between the two, contrasting personalities. And like Ashley said, you listen to Tom, and I've had a number of calls with him. We both have good relationships with him, and he was, really helpful to the film. Like he's incredibly compelling, and his rationale is so sound. Like he is this Oz character, kind of behind the curtain. No one's met him. Like he's pulling the strings. And like something else that really initially intrigued me about this world was like just like I sort of love just because it makes for great TV and great stories, like you love perfect contrast at the top, and like Ben and Tyson are a great contrast in style and personality in a way you see with like a Federer and Nadal, or a Messi Ronaldo, or a Nicholas Palmer in the history of sports, are all these sort of like great rivalries between two very seemingly different people. And that this world had them, and both Steve and Tom were great to us throughout this filming, and we're deeply appreciative. We couldn't have done it, certainly couldn't have done it without them. Steve obviously let us in um to a New York City apartment when he was doing something very controversial and very, very, very sensitive, and he allowed us to film there. And sure, we got kicked out a little bit thanks to LeBron, but and
I
I probably
let us film there because he felt guilty. He was like,
I,
oh,
I would
kick
I
him
would have
out. I'll let him
I would have
film my war room.
I would have kicked us out for LeBron too. Big LeBron fan still to this day. So don't hold it against them. And yeah, it's it's such a deeply human story that's really not about pickleball or sports, but you get a little glimpse into the mind of Steve, more so probably than Tom, throughout the film. And these ego and ambition and respect and you know revenge, perhaps even all these things that live within all of us are I think are really interestingly and at times very humorously and dramatically explored and captured in this story. So yeah, it's kind of funny seeing guys with a lot of money, fighting in the sandbox to become, I suppose, the king of pickleball, whatever that means.
Yeah, but it's great to have it on film. So thank you so much for sharing this, and yeah, opening up the doors to this kind of background view of what's happening in professional pickleball. And thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is
Yeah,
fun.
thanks so much.